America was where Superman was born in the 1930s, and since the arrival of Superman and then Batman and then every other superhero you can think of, there's something about the superhero and the American character that seem to be absolutely distinctive, not just to American comics but to America as well. And this is something that hasn't, probably prior to a recent cinematic history, this is something that hasn't really been accepted in other parts of the world, in the same way that Asterix hasn't really worked very well over here. So I think the superhero is really at the very heart of what it is that makes English-speaking American comics utterly unique from everything else. And the next slide, please, is so this is Batman. It's a relatively recent Batman in comparison with Superman being from the 30s. It's by an artist called David Mazzucchelli, and I chose this as an example partly because he's a phenomenal artist, he's a phenomenal storyteller, and this is one of the most popular Batman books. It's Batman Year One. This is the same artist that's being discussed in the next panel, the Daredevil panel, but the page on the right hand side is also David Mazzucchelli, where he's writing as well as drawing, and an artist who was actually exceptional in the superhero genre has moved over to independent comics, art house comics, non-mainstream comics, and he is even more exceptional there than he was with superheroes. And another thing about American comics is there's a huge variety. So everything is either kind of superhero or there's not superhero, and the not superhero camp is vast. And in this example, we actually see a character who's an architect, who's depicted in blue lines and geometric shapes, and a character who's an artist, and she's depicted in soft pink sketchy lines. And this is them meeting for the first time and connecting with each other and affecting each other. And throughout the course of this book, it's called Asterius Polyp. It's a masterclass in everything that you can do with a comic book that you can't do in a movie or a TV show or a stage play or a prose novel. And it's the breadth of output, the experimentation, and the superhero thing that really is at the heart of what makes American comics better than the rest of the comics here.
I love how well you take cues. This is really great.
I think I'm going to win.
I should be keeping a tally mark of who's winning. So I asked our panelists first to offer a basic definition of their comic form. I've asked each panelist to dive a little deeper to give us some examples of their form, but I wanted to push a little bit further and ask each of you what explains the distinctiveness of your form. And I thought, Vin, we could start with you to talk about why it is that manga is the way it is. What makes it distinct?
Yeah, so many people in this room will have heard of Scott McCloud, who's a major American comics theorist, and who argues that basically comics are mainly about the panel transitions and closure. This is not to make fun of Sasuke, who's the analog in the mid-90s to Scott McCloud for manga. And he says what manga is trying to do is compression and release. That basically manga creators are trying to use panel shape and size and composition and placements to crush you like a spring, basically, to build tension inside you and also to crush you inside the head of the protagonist and the character, so you're inside the world. So here we have, who's this guy? Naruto, right? One of the most famous current manga series. And you can see here as his Iruka, as his mentor, has been stabbed by a giant shuriken, as we have Mizuki revealed as a traitor. You can see how the panel goes from big to very small as it's crushing into Naruto, right? And you get a close-up on his face as he's being smushed. So what are we going to see probably in the next page Next slide. There we see the spring comes out. You see how it goes from small to big again? Like there's been an expansion. And note that it looks like he might fight, right? You see he's got a serious face on the bottom of the page, but instead he doesn't fight. Naruto runs away. Why? He's a shinobi. He's a ninja, right? His job is to collect intel, to gather data, to get strong enough to figure out the situation, to learn the terrain, and then to confront. And so it shows the character of this whole ethos of this society in the village. And it shows how this compression comes out and expands again. And great manga creators can suck you right in, and they'll keep you there for pages and pages and pages.
It's almost like a heartbeat, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And it brings you in.
And by the way, heartbeat in manga in Japanese is doki doki, and there's always having, these heartbeat effects are hugely important in all kinds of manga.
No, thanks. Antonio, tell us about Fumetti. What explains the distinctiveness of Fumetti?
Well, I like this movement that Vin was telling us of going inside the head of a character. And so, I chose something completely different from the Bonelli that I was describing before, with some very important magazines from the 70s and the 80s, Frigidaire, Cannibale, with this incredible array of authors, Liberatore, Mattioli, Pazienza. And in particular, if we go to the next slide, we can see an example of the complexity, even though maybe it's not super clear, but the complexity of the drawing of Andrea Pazienza. Here we are in a story that was done at the end of the 70s, Le straordinarie avventure di Pentotal, literally the extraordinary adventures of Pentotal, this student in Bologna, one of the major university cities in not only in Italy, in Europe. And it's a moment of turmoil, it's a moment of protest. There are so many protests in the streets. And Andrea Pazienza with Le avventure di Pentotal is trying to tell the story of the character, the protagonist, and so that's why we go inside his head. So in the panel that you see, also in the enlargement on the right side, you see different things, different balloons, if you want. So here we are completely against that model that we saw before. We see something that is happening in the mind of the character, but we also hear, the voice coming out of the radio, because something is happening. And what is happening is that a student has been killed. And so in the page on the left side, in the bottom half down, in the bottom down of the page, you see the author going inside the page and saying, "I'm sorry, reader, you need to wait a little longer because I need to fix the story. Something major has happened, a student has been killed, and I need to tell you guys the story of this student." And so he goes inside, he changes the page, and then the author goes to the publisher and asks for the fumetto, for the story, for the comics to be printed in the closest version possible to reality. And so I think this is one of other distinctive characteristics of Italian comics, this attempt with many forms, with many artistic forms, to tell us the truth of the events that we are experiencing.
Wonderful. So Van is talking about that heartbeats of compression and release with manga. We've got that truth-telling of Fumetti. Vin, how about English language comics? What is distinctive? What explains the distinctiveness?
It's the, country and culture, place and people. So the example I pulled out, Alex Toth, is Zorro, and Toth is one of your absolute masters. And Zorro, of course, was the main influence for Batman. And I think it's just, we've got some manga and some various European comics in the background there, and what makes each of our comics distinctive is the place they come from and the people who are creating them, and the cultures that they grow out of. So it's also what we've all got in common, but in this case it's what makes them all distinct. It's where they come from and the people that are creating them.
So we've got this place of origin now being a central part of it. And Billy, I think you're gonna go with that, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up on some of the things that have been said. With Tintin, you get colonialism, which is a large story. You get the North American influence going backwards and forwards. But what I'm going to emphasize is a stylistic trait which I feel has dominated world culture. Tintin was created by Hergé, whom you see on the left. And let's get this right, you wouldn't say Frank Whiteley is English, don't say Hergé is French. But here he is with an American friend. Presumably, how many of you recognise the man from Pittsburgh? See, we all do. But how many of you realise that two of them were friends? And this is a painting by Andy Warhol of Hergé. The stylistic trait that has hit me is what is called la ligne claire, the clear line. And it's this idea that if you avoid shading, you can have a world that has clear oppositions. So if you look at Tintin going to Scotland, you'll see the lines are there, but the shades aren't. Like the characters, they're either good or they're bad. And that might not be a good thing in overall narration, but it's something that has affected us in terms of Hollywood films, goodies and baddies. And it's something that has affected us stylistically in terms of Andy Warhol's pop art, which, in my opinion, has changed the world way of looking at art since the 1960s, at least, onwards. So, the English language ones might be good, but they know they owe it all to a Belgian.
I would say that's nonsense. There's a list of great American comic book artists that were aped by the pop art movement, not least Roy Lichtenstein, and where Warhol used Hergé's celebrity the same way he used Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. And I love Warhol, and I actually love Lichtenstein as well, but what Warhol was interested in was Hergé himself, not his drawings of Tintin, as Billy likes to mispronounce it. So, you're welcome to your opinion, Billy, but I think the rest of us know.
Can you just make sure all of you to ask Vin what part of England he comes from later?
Oh my goodness, I need all four of you to be on every panel I do for the rest of my life. Okay, so we've just gotten the 10 minutes till the end of our panel, so I have a very simple question left to ask the four of you. Van, you already mentioned Scott McCloud,
Yeah.
Great theoretician of comics, did a great comic book version of what makes comics that many of us use in our classes. And Scott McCloud has this very basic definition of comics, right? That comics are juxtaposed, pictorial, and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information and or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. So in other words, comics are just pictures put together in an order to make us feel something or to tell a story.
Yep.
So if that's true, why do we have these different words? Why is there a word fumetti, bande dessinée, manga, American or English language comics? Why do these different words get used and make people think that we're talking about something just truly different? Yeah, Van, go ahead.
Well, my definition of comics is lying beautifully with ink. But there are different...
Take that, McCloud, right?
That's right. But there are different cultures. I mean, we are not all the same. And our histories matter. And it sounds like you're talking about terroir, basically, the idea that the place you're from influences the wine, right? The soil, the sunshine, all these things, the acidity. And there are manga, of course, that are deeply informed by European comics. I mean, look at Uderzo. If you look the first one, he's got these amazing Michel Tanguy airplanes and Obelix, and it's the same guy. It's astonishing. But there's something deeply, too, where they're looking back and they're making jokes about Japanese dialects, and they're making jokes about history in the Edo period, and they're drawing from these deep histories. And so it's its own thing, just as the way that superhero comics are a thing. And there we had this mass, basically, genre dive event, right, with the Comics Code, which really impacted America. But yeah, the histories matter. So.
Any other comments? Billy, Antonio, Ben?
Well, I would like to say that, based on the extraordinary work of, Hergé and Tintin, there are so many also Italian authors that build on that concept of clear line or linea chiara in Italian, that I think also are worth checking out, even today, after so many years. So, that teaching of Hergé really has been so important all over the world.
Including on, I believe, on the work of Frank Whiteley, so in whose style we can see definite influence of the clear line.
From the Bruins, that fabulous Scottish strip, the Bruins, not from this French nonsense.
Clearly there is some unfinished business.
Well, this was, I have had the great honor to get to ask these questions already, but I wanted to open up the floor to questions from all of you. So please just raise your hand, and there is a microphone, I think. Yes, there's the microphone coming out, and ask away. Thanks, Melissa.
Hi, thank you all for taking time to be here. It's been really cool and interesting. I had a question that was effectively, like, when I think of manga, I also often think of, for example, anime, or of course with superhero comics, there's, especially recently with the MCU and whatnot, been a huge amount of not animated superhero, but live action myths. I'm pretty sure I've seen Asterisk cartoons as well. How do you think like some of these elements, for example in the manga, these like hairs or like love bubbles and whatnot, do you see those like get translated successfully, or is there even efforts to translate those like static visual elements over to this like animated or like live medium?
Yeah, well, anime and manga I think is unique, and they really are close related, and there's a lot of back and forth. As you probably know, a lot of manga become animes, a lot of light novels become mangas and animes, and so they're different languages, right? I mean, you can do visually, color, music, all these things, motion, but they share a lot of vocabulary. And so, yeah, so some of the same elements, with the blushing, for instance, will do very similar things in anime and manga. Deforme, that when your people become like little chibi, cute little cells, very similar. So strongly share vocabulary with things they can do differently. I personally, I like the reading experience more than the watching experience, but there's amazing anime. So. And live action movies? So.
Live action movies, for me, it's a similar thing. I can enjoy a movie, but the reading experience for me, particularly with superhero comics, it works much better on paper for me. It's not a super popular opinion, but I kind of find that superhero movies, like seeing real people in costume, is kind of like cosplay. And the thing is, you can
Be careful then.
I know you can do amazing things in movies, especially now with the technology we've got. They're so much more convincing than they used to be, and I do enjoy some of them without doubt. The recent Superman movie was great, but I prefer them on paper. It's just a personal thing, and I also don't think they need to be as close. It's easier for manga and anime to share the same vocabulary because the anime is still actually, it comes from drawings. That's not the case with the MCU and other superhero movies. So I find they're more successful when they're being distinct rather than when they're trying to be like each other.
Yeah, I need to pitch in and defend the movies. And I'm gonna say that I love them both equally. But building on the last thing that you said, Vin, absolutely, they need to be different. They need to be distinct because they work with many similarities, but also so many differences. And if you don't conceive, think your story, plan your story, and then do your story in the different media and language that you have, you're gonna do something maybe not successful, boring, ridiculous, or something. You cannot have the same experience. That's for sure. It's a different language, and so even when I don't know, let's think Sin City by Frank Miller. It was a great comics, and it was also an interesting experiment. At least, we can argue, but I think they were trying to do something different, and that for sure, it's a line of exploration. Both media were born, are, and always will be experimental, and so that I think it's their strength.
Sorry, are you pointing people? Yes, okay, sorry.
Okay. My question is about like more of a historical and cultural thing. So the English comic books and French comic books are obviously continued, succeeded by other artists, but we do not see the same thing with manga. For example, lots of creators like have health issues, mangakas have health issues, and their mangas go on hiatus, right? So what is the reason why manga is not continued or succeeded by other artists, even though they have literal they have 3-4 assistants who go on and write their own mangas, which is basically.
Well, there are rare examples where there are continuations. For instance, Berserk currently is being continued after the death of the creator. Manga, I love manga in part because they have room to breathe, but they do end. And there's usually one singular person's vision. So there's a team of assistants, and also there's, of course, the editor, and there's notes back and forth. But usually there's one creator kind of oversees the process with an end in mind. And I like that better than the superhero comics where some guy's writing Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. It changes a lot over time, right? Depending on what the era is. But this is part of just the culture of how manga has developed over time, the craft of it. It really was an apprenticeship system where you started as an assistant. Literally, Osamu Tezuka, who in Astro Boy and NW, many others, he had an apartment complex, and he would bring other young creators there, and they were his assistants. And the group of the women, the big women's movement in the 70s, the Year 24 women, did the same thing. So there's a strong sense of bringing your talent along with you, literally, physically, and then you do your thing and you run with it, and then when you're done, they do a new story. And I think it works beautifully. So.
When I was wondering, Billy, do you want to comment on that? Because Asterix, you're drawn by multiple artists, and Vin, Superman, although you do it best, drawn by many, many artists. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, Asterix seems to have worked because the new artists have developed with the times whilst keeping the same style. The counterexample is Tintin. Hergé said clearly in his will that he absolutely did not want any further Tintin adventures after his death, and there haven't been any more. That does create a sort of aura about the Tintin albums. There will not be any more, a bit like Shakespeare. He's not written much of late, so we still read Coriolanus, which we'll go and see, which might not be brilliant. So, I mean, anyway, that's the example.
Yeah. Vin, did you want to say anything about, as an artist, drawing in a series of artists?
Yeah, I'm okay with that with things like Superman and Batman because they're shared cultural icons. Everybody feels they've got something invested in these characters. Even people who don't consider themselves to be superhero fans or comic fans, like when Superman went through that phase where he had a ponytail and a trench coat, it really annoyed a lot of people that don't read comics because it wasn't right, there's also something like Van touched on it with how much Spider-Man's changed over the years, and you actually see you see what was happening in the 30s and 40s, what was happening in the 50s, what was happening in the 60s and 70s when you read the comics, you know, and which goes back to the comics coming out of the culture that they're created in. So, you know, whether it's civil rights, you know, whether it's psychedelic drugs, whether it's, you know, like censorship, what's happening in society at the time affects the art that's being made. And I think with something that's ongoing, like a Superman or a Batman comic, I think it's absolutely fine for it to be different writers and different artists constantly doing it. And I think there's a different richness there from the richness Van was talking about, where you get a manga that's created by one person, it's their vision, and it comes to an end. And there's something really amazing about that too. So I'm good with either of those things.
This is why you should come to San Diego State and study comic studies center there.
Yes.
It takes 4 classes to get a certificate at San Diego State. You can do it through Global Campus, I believe. Is that correct?
Exactly, yes. You
$5,
can
right?
get a certificate
$5.
in comic studies. You can just look up comics and SDSU, just Google it, and you will find our certificate and how it's outlaid. And I think we have 10 different comics classes being taught in the spring, and that's pretty standard. We usually have 5 to 10 different courses being offered on very different topics related to comics. So we have time for one last question, and Clarissa.
Well,
And
he actually was ahead of
Okay.
me, so.
and we have time to move out into the lobby to chat a little bit more after this.
Right,
Melissa,
yeah.
tell us about time.
Yeah, no, you're doing fine. You've got like 5 minutes or
Okay.
6 minutes, so it's time for a couple more questions. But yeah, after that, then there'll be a few minutes, and then followed by Chris Rael's panel about Daredevil Born Again. So if you have continued questions after our time is up, the panelists will be out in the hallway here, and then there's a restroom up to the left. So come back for the second panel.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
Hi guys.
Yeah, it keeps dying, so project maybe.
Well, talking about the topic that you talked in regards to different places give a different flavor to the product. What about when you bring one product from one place and you reinterpret it? The ones more known things such as the classic manga, or the Spider-Man manga, or the Batman manga, or things a little bit more unusual like Fantomas, which was a French character that was reinterpreted in one hand by the Italians, in the other hand by the Mexicans, and even had a some sort of homage in the US as Phantom X, right? So what is your stance on those in regards to taking this character with a context and then brought it to a different context? Does this work? Is it just exploitative? You're looking for money? What's your stance on this?
So what happens when a comic character is transplanted to a different place or a comic story, given we've talked about the uniqueness of place and culture on producing a comic?
To me?
Yeah. Thank you. Everybody probably has something to say about it, but go ahead.
I would say that culture continually reinvents itself, and that if you take the great classics of Homer or Virgil, these are being then reused and reinterpreted. Let's say Virgil by William Blake in the 18th century and into the 19th century. And comics will do the same thing. People will say, hey, that was really good. I can use that, and I'll accept that was really good, but then I can add my own little touch to it. And I think that's what culture is all about. And if we ever pretend we haven't got influences, maybe we're not being entirely honest.
And it's funny because, as you probably know, manga has kind of spread, right? There's manga-esque comics all over the place, and of course, Korea has manhwa, China has manhwa, and they do different things with a lot of the same language. But there actually is really interesting manga, like from Algeria, for instance. And if you look at, it's kind of melancholy, but if you look at, there's a lot of pirated manga in the world, right? Buy manga, pay the people, but it's very heavily pirated in places where, say, for instance, I love girls love manga. That's my favorite genre. And it's very heavily pirated in places like Russia or the Arabic world, where it's hard to be gay. And so people who are seeking avenues of expression are finding it in these Japanese expressions of people deeply seeking other people to see them in their soul. It's not about the body, it's about, can you be understood? Can you find this person? Can they find you in this mess of a world? Can you find someone who values you? And it travels, right? These things travel.
And Antonio, that's essentially what's happening when you've got these Western comics
Absolutely.
in the
Yeah, I mean, still today, you know, Western comics like Tex and others, you know, are popular in Italy. And but you also, if you think of the reimagination of the genre by the spaghetti western of Sergio Leone, we reinvented a genre that was invented somewhere else. There are stories. There are, you know, we are humans. So there are connections through time and through the things that. And what about Zero or Zero? That is a TV series on Netflix with an Italian, with a black Italian that is trying to make his living, and he has a dream to move to Belgium to become a manga artist. What about that? It's a wonderful TV series that you guys can watch on Netflix, and you know there is a mix of all these inputs because there are so many Italian authors today that do manga, you know, in Italian with Italian topics, problems, stories, situations that hopefully one day they're gonna be translated in Japanese.
I want to give a shout out. We're doing lots of global comics here. I want to give a shout out to Filipino comics because we're in San Diego. There's incredibly good work in the Philippines. Elastic Man and Trece and many other titles in all kinds of styles. And so that's a huge part of our community here if you're from San Diego. And so take a look and see what's there.
Yeah, and Vin, you yourself, according to Billy, are a Scot from an unspeakable part of England, drawing an incredibly quintessential American character, right?
Yeah. Well, this is so typical of an Englishman to consider Glasgow to be somewhere north of London. So I don't think I should dignify his jibes.
Well, Melissa is giving me some sort of signal,
Oh,
right?
just the QR code for the survey.
Oh, yes, let me jump ahead to that. There it is, right there. So I please join me in thanking Vin, Van, Billy, and Antonio for this wonderful discussion of comics and many boards. And please do fill out the program survey so that maybe the Comic-Con Museum will ask us back. So thank you so much. And